welcome to the Dole Institute of Politics. My name is Ella Rooms, and I am a member of the Dole Institute Student Advisory Board, the official student group of the Institute. The Student Advisory Board is a bipartisan group whose members can access many great opportunities through their involvement with the Institute, including volunteering at programs and networking with our special guests. If you are a student and would like to join, please email us at dolesab@ku.edu or speak with a student worker after the program. A video of today's program will be available on our YouTube channel. You can also access videos of past programs by visiting our YouTube channel. A loop hearing system is available to use if you have a T-coil hearing aid. We also have a limited number of listening devices. If you have questions about the loop system, or if at any time during the program you have difficulty hearing, please alert one of our staff members. After the program, we will have some time for the audience to ask questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand and a student worker with a microphone will come to you. Please stand if you are able and ask just one brief question. If you are a part of our virtual audience, you may submit your questions at dolequestions@ku.edu. The Dole Institute's mission is to foster civil and respectful discussion around important and often difficult topics. Please phrase your questions with this in mind. Before we begin, I'd like to remind you to please turn off your cell phones. Now, please join me in welcoming Senior Associate Director Dr. Barbara Ballard and Director Audrey Coleman.
Good evening, and thank you very much, Ella. We always have our students do an introduction of what we call our student culture. So we thank you so very much. I'll say good evening and welcome to the Dole Institute of Politics and the 2024 Dole Lecture with Bill Kurtis. Before introducing tonight's distinguished honoree, we would like to announce the recipients of 3 special awards that are given to members of the Dole Institute Advisory Board. Our first award, the Robert J. Dole Service to Country Award, was established by John D. Penneker, Douglas E. Smith, and Penneker Smith and Associates, and it will provide a $1,000 award each year to an active member of the Dole Institute Advisory Board. This student must show commitment to public service and demonstrate leadership qualities through their involvement at the Dole Institute Advisory Board and the KU community. The recipient of the 2024 Robert J. Dole Service to Country Award is Sophia Herrera. Would you please stand? Please seated. The second award, the Elizabeth Dole Public Service Award, was established by John D. Penneker, Douglas E. Smith, and Kathleen M. Smith to provide a $1,000 award each year to an active member of the Dole Institute Student Advisory Board. The student must demonstrate commitment to public service and civic engagement and embrace opportunities to bridge education with future goals. The recipient of the 2024 Elizabeth Dole Public Service Award is Kenna McNally. Please stand. Now, please join me in welcoming Student Advisory Board Coordinator Allie Hager to present our third award.
Thank you. Our third award is the Noah Hoekstra Memorial Award, which was established by students last year in honor of SAB member Noah Hoekstra, who sadly passed away in 2023. This award seeks to recognize an SAB member who exemplifies Noah's commitment to community service, advocacy, and compassion. The student must carry forward Noah's legacy of kindness, resilience, and dedication to making the world a better place. This award is unique because it's driven by student nominations, allowing peers to recognize and honor each other's achievements. The recipient of the first ever Noah Hoekstra Memorial Award is Amber Brown, who was nominated by SAB member Olivia Lara. Amber, if you could please stand. I'll now welcome Dr. Ballard back to the stage.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask Sophia to come forward in front. Also, McKenna and Amber. Would you please give him a warm congratulations? Thank you very much. Our Student Advisory Board is extremely important to the Dole Institute of Politics. As you notice, they will greet you, and they will greet you when you leave again. So that's part of what we do, and we couldn't do without them. This evening's program, the Dole Lecture, is held yearly in the spring and commemorates the date when Bob Dole was critically wounded while serving in Italy during World War II. In tribute to Senator Dole's resilience and commitment to service the nation, we welcome guests who embodies principles and values that Senator Dole exemplified throughout his career in public service. Tonight's interview will be conducted by Dole Institute Director Audrey Coleman, and this year's special guest is Bill Kurtis. I am delighted that so many of you have turned out this evening. Bill Kurtis, renowned for his distinguished journalism career, began his career start at WIBW-TV in Topeka, Kansas. In 1966, Kurtis was hired by Chicago's WBBM-TV, where he was a field reporter and later anchor of the Channel 2 News. Kurtis co-anchored CBS Morning News and later returned to WBBM-TV as anchorman. Additionally, he serves as the official judge and scorekeeper on NPR's Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. And since you had such a pause, I'm gonna do it again. And additionally, he serves as the official judge and get ready, scorekeeper on NPR's Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, and has narrated multiple films, including the Anchorman film starring Will Ferrell. Now, I don't have to ask you, but I will. Please join me in welcoming the esteemed, well-known, and beloved Bill Kurtis. I turn it over to
Well, I think, Mr. Kurtis, all this points to the fact, this bio, this room, it all points to the fact that, I'm not sure how to say it, but I think you must be some kind of a big deal.
Obviously, someone has seen the movie.
Well, and the folks who are laughing will have seen the movie, and I think that's so interesting that this movie, it came out 20 years ago, and that really introduced you to a whole new generation of folks who know you for your voice instead of your face.
Well, a new demographic. For those of you who have seen it or haven't seen it, it goes a little bit like this. There was a time before cable, when only men read the news. People believed everything they heard on television. And in San Diego, that man was Ron Burgundy. And in Lawrence, Kansas, that man was Bill Self.
All right, you folks got your tickets worth. You can. No, sir. I mean, you have ascended to a place where you are represented in pop culture. Daryl Hammond has played you on SNL. You've made an appearance on South Park. Is that right, too?
Yeah.
So, I mean,
Well,
you've arrived.
You're being very nice because, when I was offered this role as a narrator, journalists just didn't do movies. You're reading someone else's script, and I thought my career was over. But I was older, and I was looking for a little action, and they gave me the script, and I'm reading it on the plane, and was laughing so much because the writers were all Saturday Night Live, and Adam McKay, the director, it was his first movie, and so nobody knew whether it was going to be a success or not, but I knew that I was standing on the edge of my career. So I was very worried, and yet things started, and it turns out, after the movie plays for a little while, every anchorman in the country had wanted that job. And so most speeches that I give start out with the anchorman quote. And from there, I moved on to Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, which is a news quiz on NPR. It's on Saturday mornings and Sunday mornings sometime. My voice is the only vote that Congress can't veto. So we have a lot of fun. And my career didn't change. I went into broadcasting, production, documentaries, and so I wound up narrating 1,000,
Wow.
producing 500. And so I just throw those back at anybody who challenges me. It's fun.
Well, before we talk about your Kansas roots and how you got maybe where you started, I want to ask you a little bit more about the movie. And would you remind everyone, Ron Burgundy leads a team of news reporters. And
Yep.
so you have worked on some of the most hallowed, iconic news reporting teams,
Yeah.
known to America. So will you just remind us a little bit about some of those folks that you've worked with? And maybe
So
share
the
a
question
story or
is,
two.
who is Ron Burgundy?
Who is Bill Kurtis?
Am I the model? I've been afraid someone would accuse me of that. It's not true. What Adam, who has gone on to win Academy Award as a director, and Will got together, they knew that it would be a good platform for the pratfalls of Will Ferrell. So he took little malapropisms and expanded them, blew them up. And they turned out to be quite funny, but still scary at the time for me. It turned out to be the sort of the landmark first movie for at least a decade of the most popular ensemble team of comedic movie writers and performers. Who knew? From Judd Apatow. And my audition that I had to read through the script was simply reading the script. And I was in Chicago. Their team was at Universal Studios, and it was Will and Adam McKay and Judd Apatow, the producer of all producers for anything comedic, and 3 and 4 others. They were all jammed in to the broadcast booth there, listening to me. And after every, I have a good sense of humor, but after every line, I would laugh. Well, once you write a joke and you hear it and read it, it's dead in the sense that it's not funny anymore because you've heard it already. So they were so tired of reading over their script that they were so happy that somebody else was laughing at their material that they said, well, he's got the job, let's get the job. I guess I will go on. I don't want to take all this time. You say, what happened? Christina Applegate was the woman who is going to bust into the male-dominated news ensemble. And they said, you want to go see the shooting in the Bear Pit at Griffith Park, because the scene is that Christina is down doing a live shot of the new arrival, which was a grizzly bear. And she gets scared and things like that. Okay, I'll go. And sure enough, there she is. They had extras on the side looking down into the pit. And all of a sudden, there's a shout. Christina comes running out, almost crying, out of the pit. And the trainer comes out to the real grizzly that they had in there, for realism. And things calmed down just a little bit. And what had happened, if you're a trainer or familiar with animals, the grizzly got wind of, and I mean wind, the scent of her period.
Oh my.
And just went like this. Everybody, boom, just shaken. So there is the sensationalism of this interview.
You mentioned wind. We've had some wind today, and
Wind.
wind factors into your story. So tell us a little
You
bit
know,
about
that wind
Kansas.
follows me wherever I go.
And it changed your life.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
did. Just to recap, I come from Independence, Kansas. It takes a village to raise a child. For my class, 58 in high school, it was the Garden of Eden, because there's an educational structure down there, and I suggest perhaps for every Kansas town you have a coach and teachers, favorite teachers, and extracurricular activities, which I really like, and pastors. And in my case, a first job, which was at 16, the radio station, KIND. So while I was going to school, I worked there, learning everything I use now, and I was addicted. I was addicted to football, and addicted, until the second game of my senior year, when I was a linebacker and I made a tackle, and two of my compatriots fall on my shoulders and compress my vertebrae, and cracked the vertebrae, put me in a back brace for 3 months. And I should have come to KU at that point. But when you're addicted, you're just addicted. So I said, I'm going to get well. I'm going to stay with Independence Community College and go out for football again. And sure enough, I did. And did the season. I was going on to the second season and was running down a hill with wind sprints, fell, and had a compound fracture of my throwing finger. And you can't be a quarterback, without that first finger. God was telling me something, sending me a sign. And I said, look, I've had it. Finally, I get it. I'm going to go to KU. And so I came to KU, and sure enough, here was a vessel that held all the tools, if you wanted to take them to what you want to do on your career path. So the student station was KUOK. The station for a select few was KANU. It is now the head of KPR, Kansas Public Radio. And I was lucky enough to get a job at that classical musical station. I was fortunate also that I would pick up every experience. So I had two career paths. One was academic, Bruce Linton and his team, and then my own put together, which was as much as I could possibly do in experience. We didn't have a debate team at Independence, so I went out with the freshmen. Oh my God, what a humbling experience, when I was a senior. And Glenn, my instructor at KANU, said, would you like to do a remote with me at Hoke Auditorium, where we have an organ professor who is going to have his final recital. He's retiring. I said, absolutely, whatever it takes. So I went over, I sat down, Glenn was behind me, the cavernous Hoke Auditorium where Wilt Chamberlain played basketball laid out in front of me, and this elderly man comes walking across the stage. They made him walk the entire distance across the stage, sat down at the organ. I believe I turned to Glenn and said that, with the first, and got ready to read his first number. And we hear the sound that is made by a child who puts all his hands on the keys at the same time, just this horrendous. I thought, my God, is this a new piece for the organ? And he had a heart attack and fell right into the keys right there. Fortunately, Glenn was there. I throw my hands up. He stepped in. We threw it back to the studio, and it lives in every class that is now in broadcasting. So we count that. At the same time, I took a job part-time, I think I was a junior, at KTOP, Topeka. It was a top 40 radio station. They changed my name on the air to Tony Kurtis.
The other Tony Curtis.
With a KFWMA on 1440 Top 40 Radio, the home of J. Jasmo Bop, the professor of the College of Knowledge, with our sonoramic news cruiser 1410. That's all I remember from that. And I knew that after 6 months, same records, same time on the air, same shtick, and I had commuted from Carruthers where I picked up a sack lunch, drove Highway 10 because the turnpike was too expensive at 35 cents. I went on the air at 1 o'clock, left here at noon, my first commute, and you either check in at Menninger's after 6 months doing top 40 radio or quit. So I broke my contract and through a television 15-minute newscast on what's happening at KU, I just discovered this called Scope. It was sort of my audition to get a part-time job at WIBW, Channel 13. I did the weather for 2 years. I went off to a Marine Reserve. We had mandatory service then, came back, started in law school, had 3 years and part-time job. And it was great. My wife was a teacher, so between us, we got through law school. And I was studying for the bar at a review class. Just met a gentleman at our dinner who was at the same review class where I was. And Tom Parmley, the news director, had asked me to fill in for him for the 6 o'clock news because he wanted to leave early on vacation. So I said, fine, because I wanted to get out of a tax review. We were studying for the bar anyway. And so I head out for the station. It was a typical day in Kansas, hot. The cold front was rolling across from Manhattan, Kansas. They had had showers in the southeast part of the state. And so we were getting ready for the routine of warning of possible weather conditions. There was no Doppler radar at the time. There was no radar at the time that we would use. There was a weather service. The sirens were all set up. Forbes was flying nuclear SAC bombers out of here on its routine flights. Can you imagine, out of Topeka? And everybody kind of was casual about it because, you know, it never hits. All of a sudden, it was around 7 o'clock, and I heard from the studio a two-way radio from our cameraman. He said, I'm on the southwest edge of the city. I'm about 20 miles out. We have a tornado on the ground. It's white, it's big. You know, white means that it hasn't churned up all the dirt yet. And, you know, I think all of us felt, well, it'll hit Burnett's Mound and bounce up and dissipate, and it's not, certainly not, we're not gonna have to deal with it. It gets closer and closer. There were two things that convinced me that this was something. Right on the other side of Burnett's Mound, which was what they thought was an Indian burial mound at the southwest edge of the city, and that the Indian spirits would suddenly make it go away, a Shetland pony farm with about 200 small horses was hit, and they were impaled on a fence. And that word came to us. The second was 2 apartment complexes were hit and wiped out, 200 units. So suddenly we're in the deep. And I thought, turned to my Charlie Ross, my general manager. He looks at me, and he was the boss, and he said, well, let's go on. It's shortly after 7 o'clock, and give the warning. The sirens had gone off. So there was a siren going, but the Weather Bureau, I think the chief was not there on that particular day, and they had not seen the hook on their radar. So we're alone. And I realized the next few words I would say, I break up every time, would mean life and death. And that was quite a responsibility for a young guy, but for broadcasting. I could cuss, and it goes through my mind, what am I going to say to really get the word and get people into the basement? Cuss, which would have been a bit too shocking, and somebody might take it as a joke. I could cry, because I felt the hysteria kind of come up inside me. Well, you got to say something, you know. You don't want to break down in tears. And so, just by instinct, I said, for God's sake, take cover. Now, that's not exactly how I said it. It was, for God's sake, take cover. And that got the message through. So we went on and stayed on for 24 hours. We were the communication for National Guard units coming in to help because the tornado had started at those apartment buildings and cut a line right through residential areas, the Topeka State Mental Hospital, Washburn University, 8 out of 10 old sandstone buildings wiped out. And then on, ripped a big hole from the copper at the Capitol building. This was a bad one. My wife, Helen, along with my daughter, who was here with me, was on married housing on campus. And the guys studying for the bar came out of the basement, you know, and they looked over and they saw what they thought were birds. And it was really the debris being churned up at the top of a funnel cloud that was coming across the golf course. They ran for the basement. My wife kind of didn't want to go up to the science building. She said, no, Horton, I went by Horton then, would call me if it's really serious. I was busy. And so finally she goes with the neighbors, goes down to the basement of the science building. It was hit head on. She was pulled up against the elevator where she felt the sucking noise and heard the sound that someone in one of the neighborhoods has described as, I thought the buffalo were coming back. The sound of thousands in the air. I thought that was the best description I've heard of tornadoes. Well, I had accepted a job at a law firm in Wichita, and suddenly I got the God's message. And I said, you know, if it doesn't come through this time, I give up. And figured that's what he was saying too. So I said, not law for me. And sent my tapes out, and they were accepted by the CBS station in Chicago. And off we go with a U-Haul trailer behind Tom Mick's Rambler, and headed for Chicago at the beginning. And I traced the beginning to 5 words in 5 minutes that determined the rest of my life. And those 60 years coming up to today was a television career. So when I say that I didn't want to ruin it by appearing in a frigging movie called Anchorman, that's what I was afraid of.
So that tornado changed thousands of people's lives. It changed your life
Yep.
and it completely,
Yeah.
took you in a completely different
Yeah,
direction
yeah.
physically.
Yeah, you know, it's a moment, and there are probably people here who were there experiencing it. I know there are people here who watched it from high buildings, because they told me just a moment ago about it. It of course, never leaves you. And it does change your life. I went to Emporia to give a speech on the dedication of the Pioneer Women's statue, and it was 90 degrees out in the sun, and there was no shade. And I tried to cut the speech short, and afterwards, when I went down into the crowd and they gathered around me, I said, geez, why didn't you at least go under a tree? I'm sorry. And they said, we were watching that day, and we have relatives in Topeka, and we just wanted to thank you. That was it.
Well, that speaks so much to the time and as you said, the trust that television viewers put in broadcasters
Yes.
at that time and really during the whole of your career.
Yeah.
And that's
yeah.
such an interesting dynamic, that how that's changed over the last
Well, it started
couple of decades.
at KU, and I was putting together this career path. Gave me the opportunity of if you're smart enough to figure out what you want to do early enough, then you can piece it together, because it's usually all there in front of you. Eisenhower said, he said, let's get down to it. Until you choose what you essentially want to do or your goal and erase all the distractions around it and concentrate on that mission, nothing's going to happen. His mission was Normandy. So go to the Eisenhower Library in Abilene. They need you.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your time in Chicago. You've likened it, if you don't mind me quoting, covering the law in 1966 Chicago was like mid-19th century London.
Well,
And this is the late 60s, right? So
the
you're,
late 60s, and I walked in. Here I am, a young lawyer, and all set with fair trial and free press and ready to argue. And there was a group of people in the old gray lady up around the bench where there was a judge, calling out names. And, he'd call out a name, and a woman in the back would stand up, and it was total chaos. And I was thrown. This is justice in America. So it was a baptism of fire. But the real baptism came because I was sort of the only lawyer on the staff of reporters. Today, everybody's a lawyer, it seems like. And I was assigned to the first trial, the first murder of the century, and that was Richard Speck. You may know he killed 8 student nurses while under drugs, crawling through a window and lying in wait as one by one the Philippine students came home. They were nurses, studying to be nurses. And one by one, I think he was going to just rob them. But the first one spit in his face, and he cut her throat. And then he stabbed all the others. And there was a pool of blood the police had to walk through. You can imagine the terror that swept through Chicago until they found him. So they found him on the day I arrived in Chicago with my little coterie of wife and child, trying to find an apartment and getting used to the big city. I mean, God, I'd never been there in a city that big. And I was assigned to go to the trial. The trial was sudden. I realized there were 2 challenges. I'm the only one, I'm sure, who realized 2 challenges that what should have been a slam dunk because he was arrested within 2 weeks and had fingerprints and things. One of them was there was a shepherd, a doctor, was convicted of killing his wife. And the issue of trial publicity, which rendered his trial unable to be fair in Cleveland, had caused the Supreme Court to reverse the case because there was too much. I mean, it was described by the Supreme Court as a Roman circus. The reporters were allowed to sit right there, and as if I was a juror, they could reach out and touch a juror. They could exhibit, they look at the exhibits. It's as if they were part of the conviction that happened. So first of all, I had to wonder, as did the prosecutor, and worry that the Speck thing, God knows there had never been publicity that this is our man, you know, coming from the police chief. So the second was the Miranda case. Now, you have watched television, and the police, whether it's NYPD or cold case file, not cold case file, you know, the police would make the arrest and they said, I'm going to read you your rights now. You have the right to an attorney. You have the right to, you know, anything you say, you know, going to be held against you. That's where it was established by the Supreme Court. Well, were the Miranda rights given to Richard Speck? No. But it was such a big case that I think it was overlooked. The prosecutor had one witness. That was going to be his whole case. It was Corazon Amaral, and she had hidden under a bed in that bloody murder scene, and she saw the whole thing. So he put her in a hotel for 9 months until the trial started, hiding her from the press and the public, and then sort of surprising the trial by bringing her to the stand. And Speck was convicted. He goes to our big maximum security prison, Stateville. He escaped Old Sparky, a death penalty, because of it was ruled by the Supreme Court to be unconstitutional. It was later changed, but nobody wanted to go through the Speck trial again. So along about 1994, the trial was in 1966, 67. 1994, somebody comes into my office and said, we have a videotape that you probably should see. It was given to us by a lawyer. We can't say the name, but she wanted you to have it. So I put it up, and up on the screen comes Richard Speck, naked, in a room adjacent to the kitchen with another inmate, a pile of cocaine in front of him, $100 bills, and he has taken the role of the woman in a jailhouse sex ring on videotape. So I bring in the
I
prosecutor.
thought the earlier story was going to be the salacious story.
Right. Hey, I got a million of them.
Oh, boy.
So I bring in the prosecutor, and I say, is that Richard Speck? He said, oh, yes, yes. We held the tape and just trying to nail it down, I think, for 9 months or something like that. And then when we aired it, every television station, of course, in America wanted it. All my old friends wanted a piece. And it turned out to be the most, the most improvement to the penal system of Illinois ever came about from 4 concurrent investigations as a result of watching the most hated man in Illinois, in Chicago, and probably the country, essentially laughing at the public. And he said, he was asked on camera, why did you kill him? Just wasn't their day. He said, if they knew how good I have it in here, they'd let me go. And I mean, just sometimes, you know, seeing an accident actually happen, or the bodies on the highway, you never forget, and it makes you change your life. Well, it changed their life, the penal system. And I still can't get into the prisons to do a story. But that was my first of 4 major trials. I won't go into each one. But
You did reporting from the street, too,
Yeah,
from
yeah, and that was where
1967
yeah.
Detroit and the 1968
yeah, and-
Democratic National Convention.
I did. In Detroit, it was 67. We were in our whites in the Navy Reserve, and we were walking down the street for our 2-week active duty. And a tank goes by. I was with another guy, and I said, well, what is that? And the guy in the turret yells at us, and they say, hey, Navy, have they called up the Navy too? Well, it turned out to be the worst riot that Detroit had ever had, and one of the worst the nation had ever had. So when we were there to handle a NATO fleet that was coming through the Great Lakes, and all those sailors wanted was to go on liberty, in the bars of Detroit. And we said, no. And they said, oh, we can handle it. Yeah, no, you can't. We drove through, and they had a machine gun behind sandbags in front of a police station, and they killed, a good number. Mm-hmm. Well, time passes. This is the hottest news town in the country, and my first in really getting used to reporting. I liked the street, but they made me an anchorman, so I was kind of doing 2 things at once, which gave me some power. And there was an old fable that the cub reporters on the newspapers would always be assigned to go interview Tokyo Rose. Tokyo Rose. Isn't that the siren of the Orient who broadcast to our military, our Navy, in the Pacific during World War II? What in God's name? Yes, it was. So I go down, and the joke was the cub reporters would go down and could never get the interview because she'd been burned by the press. But she was working in her father's grocery store, Japanese grocery store. And I walked in, and Chicago is very ethnic. You can find a Polish grocery store where only Polish is spoken, and Greek, and in this case, Japanese. And we kind of hit it off. And I went back a number of times over the course of a month or 2 and looked up her story, and her story seemed to make sense, that she was caught in Japan, couldn't get out. She had been there visiting a sick aunt, and got a job at Radio Tokyo. 3 prisoners of war who we were doing broadcasts asked, is there anybody out there who speaks American? Well, she had graduated from UCLA, was this coquettish little gal who had a great voice, radio voice. And so they put her, she's on our team. And they would write scripts, and the scripts would include weather forecasts of the weather over Tokyo, hoping that the bombers would follow. And when the war ended, the press wanted to see 2 people. Tojo, head of the forces, and 2, Tokyo Rose, because Tokyo Rose was what the sailors knew. Well, there was never a real Tokyo Rose. Tokyo Rose was the Kilroy among the troops. They named her that. Mm-hmm. There were actually 20 female voices on Radio Tokyo. She was one, and probably the most American sounding, but she had gone on the radio under the name Orphan Ann. And she had 15 minutes, and somehow they got Bugs Bennigan, was a popular jazz artist, and they were entertaining, and they were named they wanted to be entertaining, so they would build up an audience, so when they put in some propaganda from the Japanese, it would be effective. Well, war ended. She was investigated by the MacArthur CIC investigative unit and turned loose. And then President Truman came in. He was under pressure to bring a lot of these people to treason trials. Axis Sally and Iva Nikino was her real name. She went on trial. She was convicted. I thought was innocent, and went to jail, 10-year prison, often good behavior, and spent the rest of her time until she met me in Chicago. She granted an interview, and we went through her story. Well, it's now in the Library of Congress, if you want to call it up. I think it's on Google. If any of my stories, incidentally, there's one thing that makes my stories different than fake news, is that they're all on videotape. And so you can just go to YouTube and find it there. Well, we became fast friends. Ultimately, her pardon, Gerald Ford, right over here, pardoned her, and she's now dead, 88, and being given awards right and left by the Navy veterans, which was great. She was a wonderful, wonderful lady. But that same year, the Democratic well, first of all, King was assassinated. Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. The Democratic Convention was held in Chicago, and all hell broke loose. And demonstrators came from all over the country to gather at Balboa, Michigan, right in front of the Hilton Hotel, and sit down as demonstrators and protesters. And the Chicago police, not trained in crowd control, waded in on orders to the demonstrators to clear the intersection. Nobody was killed. Nobody was really seriously injured, but it was recorded on 2-inch. Somebody brought 2-inch videotape up today at the corner and carried by motorcycle out to Walter Cronkite at the convention. And he said, well, just roll it. You know, we don't have time to edit it. That was the word up in the booth. Well, just roll it. Well, when it suddenly appears on air, you have this phalanx of Chicago cops, you know, beating their way through the demonstrators, and it split the country, split it right down the middle, polarized, as they say. So that was the big story to come out, and I was right in the middle. I was on a car top, which crushed down right at that corner, and I could see, here's a lesson for the journalism students. I could see the line of cops holding back 10,000 protesters, and I could see them move. And there was a demonstrator that tried to get through, and the protesters were pushing against the cops, and the signal was given, clear the intersection. And it was not bloody, but had a brutality look. And I thought, well, that's it. I was wrong, because I had not seen the entire scene. And a correspondent for Time, a friend of mine, he said, well, that wasn't quite true. I was on the balcony on Balboa, and 200 police came in reinforcements, and the crowd reeled backward and pushed those up front into the police. Who's wrong, police or the protesters? Chicago had to live with that until the next Democratic Convention, 20 years later, and I learned that, yep, I got it wrong only because I didn't observe it. So, you know, truth is like looking at the many facets of a diamond. It all depends on your perspective. Always check it out If your mother tells you she loves you, check it out. And
That's haunting advice.
that's right. I'll just, so they were tried, and you've seen the Aaron Sorkin movie. There have been movies and the plays, and the trial of the Chicago 7, was a year later. I won't go into it, but it was Bobby Seale bound and gagged in the courtroom. I mean, all these incredible headline-making stories, I'm 26. I just graduated from law school. What am I doing here? And then after that trial, I went out to another trial in Chicago, in California. I accepted a job as a CBS News correspondent. I don't know if you've heard of it, Charles Manson. 10 months I sat as close as me to you with Manson. And
Wow. I have many more questions, and you have many more
thought you
stories.
might.
But I want to let the audience ask you some questions. Do you mind?
Oh, we've gone that long?
Yeah,
I've
yeah.
talked all this time? I'm
I'm
sorry.
gonna let them have a turn, and then I'll follow up if we don't exhaust them, which I expect that we will. So
Okay.
audience and students, if you would come around, and I'll up. There's one gentleman up here, Rachel.
John, I'm a proud K-State Wildcat. This is this
And a
is
brave man.
This is Kansas.
Good.
As a journalist in Kansas, did you have opportunity to approach the subject of, buffalo commons? You mentioned buffalo early.
Yes.
Maybe jackalopes, maybe snipe hunts, which obviously we know was
Right.
invented in Kansas.
Well, if you want to stick with Buffalo Commons, that's a plan, a dream on putting together the plains, back to the plains where the buffalo roamed, all the way into Nebraska and North Dakota and down here through the Flint Hills. I have bequeathed my ranch to my daughter, Mary Kristen, and she has 100 buffalo. It's called the Red Buffalo Ranch. I would love to see the commons a reality, and maybe as climate change demands that we change our agricultural practices, maybe we'll get closer and closer. If there's some way that these ranchers can make money from it, because they have to eat somehow. It seems like a far-fetched thing, but I'm with you.
Thank you. Other questions?
I promise I
there's one
won't
way
make
back.
it bloody.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you. Would you talk about when you were broadcasting during the Topeka tornado, would you talk about what it was like trying to broadcast a breaking news event of that magnitude at your age at that particular time, just in terms of gathering information and being able to broadcast it out very quickly?
Yeah. The way we got information was really by a word of mouth. It was 2 hours before I had called immediately when the lines were still up to find out how my wife was and Mary Kristen, and they were okay in the science building. But it was 2 hours before I learned that the Washburn had been wiped out. And it came from a judge who actually drove out to the TV station on the western side of, at Menninger's Foundation. So it was really that, because the phones were out. And we did have reporters with the two-way radios. They were on the scene, but it was kind of limited to what we could see. Once the film started coming in, there was the classic tornado damage where the sides of the houses were open and demolished and had taken off the flat concrete slabs. And it wasn't, I will say only, I think it was 12 deaths occurred. It was $1 billion in damage. This was an E5 before tornadoes were even ranked. and to have only 12 deaths, we'll take credit for some of that. Certainly the Forbes sirens could take credit for giving a warning. And there were sort of like the Luftwaffe coming into London, we had observers stationed out by the edge of the town, and they would call in, like Ed Rutherford, our cameraman, I see this, I see this. But we had none of the tools of today. I mean, my God, you could see it forming on the radar hooks, you know, that the weathermen have today, and the entire weather department turns out. And it's very good, they're very good. None of us expected it or were trained for it. I don't know, except, you know, give the word. But all of us did our jobs. And when you put them all together, the team works. And when you're focused on that one goal, one, give the warning. Two, base it on fact, you know, not on any, you know, rumors. We did a good job.
We have another question back here.
Yeah, from your perspective, given the current state of broadcast journalism, is the public better served when you had 3 national newscasts of a half-an-hour duration, or the 24-hour news cycle, which inevitably leads to speculation because you can't be on television for that long with a set of facts that is this long, and you just inevitably start speculating about what might be. And what is your perspective on that now as a consumer of news and information?
Well, add to the 24-hour news channels the social media. So it's a churning of speculation. Now, I'm not sure that, you know, only 3 networks, we just weren't staffed up. You just didn't have as much to choose from. But you're absolutely right. You have to fill the time. So let's take CNN. When you go home tonight, you will see Jake Tapper or someone, you know, with a panel of 3. Now, 3 experts or 4, and each one has a bit of a perspective, and they may be generals to give us their opinion of what is happening and going to happen. They're not there. You're not getting fact. And, you know, getting fact is a difficult thing because you have to go and observe and see. So the ones that I really pay attention to are the frontline reporters in Ukraine, in Gaza, because they're there getting shot at. And when they speculate, they're talking to the guys on the ground. I was on an aircraft carrier and we were doing a story. And I talked to the captain and I said, you know, I understand that F-18As are kind of not very good because they have a lot of repair that is needed. He said, oh no, they're the best. And you know, we can bomb anybody and they're the best plane we've ever had. So I go down to, I'm led down, and well, this is down below decks where they're worked on. And I go to a staff sergeant who is in charge of the grease monkeys. And I said, I've heard that, you know, there are a lot of repairs and you need parts. He said, this is the worst son of a bitch ever built. We're having to, you know, cannibalize those jets to keep these in the air. Who would you believe? So you kind of weigh the two and you do your job. You get as much information as you can and you're weighing. You know, I get a little upset at the charge of fake news. I don't know. In 60 years, I don't know anybody who is in the business to create fake news. It's hard enough trying to get the truth. Now, fake news can come in your speculation that you point out because they've got to fill things. And it's opinion. Most of my career has been on the three networks reporting facts. And we would not simply, and to give an opinion was fireable. Today, you know, I've been on guest shows and they want to know what you think. You know, what's the opinion? And, you know, the experts, I don't want to disparage them, but journalism, I believe, has been the most successful institution to come through the Trump years of anything. Better than FBI, better than the Justice Department. They're hammered, you know, so often, wrongly. But I know the reporters who work the beat, and they're good. They're good. Not all are good. So it's up to you to compare. You know, read your internet, Google them, and find out what everybody is saying. But it puts a responsibility on the viewer, a lot of it. You have more information that is coming through the air than any time in history. And very often I find, I don't know that the internet has ever not had an answer that I wanted in research.
I give you exactly the answer.
Yeah, I mean, it's unbelievable. So we have to learn how to now. There is a new challenge, and that's AI, artificial intelligence. Someone could take my voice from this recording and make a career out of it. I mean, and fashion whatever they wanted to say using my voice. That's what the big writer's strike was about. And AFTRA, SAG-AFTRA said, you know, this is the end of careers. So pay us if you're going to use our voice, but ask us first. So there's going to be a big kind of restrictive, hopefully, barrier before we just going to go willy-nilly and do anything, you know, with AI in almost every field. So, and what is factual on AI? We're now seeing advertisement, Russian propaganda, Chinese, and they're picking up our divisive and crucial issues and putting their own spin on it. How do you know? Go to KU and they'll teach you.
I have a question over here. Yeah.
Thank you. It's great to see you here this evening. I'm originally from Chicago, and I remember your days on WBBM with Walter Jacobson very well. Really enjoyed your newscasts.
Thank you.
Yeah, you did a great job. But you mentioned a number of stories from those days. I remember them all. The Richard Speck murders. I remember the day that happened. The convention in 1968. I watched it on TV from our living room, about 10 miles away. I also remember the west side of the city burning down after Dr. Martin Luther King had been assassinated, after Bobby Kennedy had been assassinated. The Chicago 7 trial, Mayor Richard Daley, and his days as mayor. But I'm curious, and maybe especially for the younger people here this evening, compare those days, those times, the mid to late 60s to the early 70s, to today. And make that comparison, if you could, politically, but just generally the scene in our country as you see it. I'd be interested in hearing that.
Yeah. I don't know that I could give you a good one, a good answer. I'm not the political expert. But a lot of it depends on the tools you're working with. I want to keep it next to journalism. We were shooting film at the convention. And that means you have to process the film, which is 45 minutes. You have to edit the film another 45 minutes. You have to shoot the film with the right conditions, with enough light. That was another reason the blue helmets came out under the street lamps at the convention. So you're delayed in getting that news. Nobody was reporting live from the scene. So there's a delay. You have time to think about what you're going to report. Today, everything is live. I mean, it's very hard for a reporter to. Now, if they're on the scene and can see it, the big censor is time. If they're just going to get 30 seconds to stand in front of a camera, then you're not going to get much insight into a story. But you'll get it someplace. Not from the three networks. Those days were, you know, the foreign reporters, correspondents, they had a week to prepare and go have to the bar and, you know, have a smoke and drink and write their story. And that's why foreign correspondence seems so romantic. But it has changed an awful lot. Now, the young people who are being educated in journalism schools, like KU, God, you know how many people they have? 800. There were 40 or so, I think, probably not that little. But people want to be reporters because they can see it having an effect. And they can see it perhaps like a tornado can change the world. Well, they're getting the best education in my lifetime. They come out of school and they're ready to stand on the street and know exactly what they're going to report. Not before it happens. You know, and I said, don't these people ever make a mistake? You know, they're kids, they're brand new. They're good on camera, they're good in the field. What they need is time. Now, there are places not among the three television networks, but on YouTube, on individual programs or news reports. And you have to watch it because Newsmax, you know, is pro-conservative. And Fox was, there were good people working there, but the management had told them, look, we want to emphasize this, the right and conservative view. I think they've changed because their reputations were being tainted. So that's a change. Is it better? Maybe in some cases it would be, but we kind of did the same thing in the tornado. It was live now, and the reason I went into broadcasting was because I saw the effect that it can have. It can save lives. Anyway, I'm sorry to wander for you.
Bill, if I could mention to the audience, you're working on a book,
Yes.
right? And so, Bob, I wanted to your point, because I noted a quote, right? I was peeking on your manuscript. You said, whenever someone says things can't get any worse, this is talking in reference to the late 60s. Whenever someone says things can't get any worse, I just smile my old man smile and keep my mouth shut. So maybe that's an answer for you. Maybe that was as bad as it gets.
I'll tell you why I said that. 15 years ago, I was doing climate change strictly because the scientists were saying we were going to have extreme weather. I had to wait until about 5 years ago. And now I know that if you have a beach house on the coast of the United States, either one, Eastern or Pacific, sell it. It's going to be gone. More tornadoes, yes, but we've had a lot of tornadoes. I think we'll kind of get lost. But rain, floods, it's all coming true. But what has happened that those of us, you know, in the business is, why isn't the message getting through that we're not waiting for the crisis, we're in the crisis. And it's going to require a change in agriculture. We're going to, do you know how many, in methane is 80 times, I think, as potent as carbon dioxide. So we have to do something about that even before carbon. Now, they come from leaky oil wells because, you know, you're pulling a well, it's, you don't want to kind of go through all the good guys will close an oil well if it's dry or, you know how many oil wells are in Kansas? 250,000.
Wow.
With the potential they could all be leaking. So we have these massive problems. And what kind of a report is going to make a difference? So that's actually in the twilight of my career. You know, I'm kind of looking around for it. I also have some news for you. What time is it?
We're good. We're about in an hour since we started, so we're
Okay.
good. Well, we could take maybe 2 more questions
Yeah.
if you finish up.
Okay, good.
Yeah, go ahead, Rachel.
Hello, I am from Chicago, and going home from work to see you was such a pleasure, and to hear what you had to say.
Oh, thank you.
But I would like to ask you, considering all that you have seen and all of you have experienced, and I listened to you on Saturday on Wait, Don't Tell Me. There you have such great humor. How do you manage that, considering all that you have experienced, all that you see still happening?
Oh, it's kind of my little busman's holiday. It's a lot of fun. And here's another option. It's a quiz show, so we're making fun of, I guess, the news. And it's like daily, you know, on the Comedy Central, it's getting information through. Kids watch it, so it's kind of a fun way to absorb information. So far, I've gotten away with it because, as I say, I'm not a line correspondent or an anchorman. I'm kind of a documentary producer. Otherwise, tell me if I'm not getting away with it. But thank you for your remarks. Like going home, isn't it?
All right, one final question before we wrap up for the evening. Last call. Okay, way in the back. Last one.
Hi, Bill. Thanks for coming back to Kansas. You've had a whole career, it seems, of being outside of Kansas and then coming back, outside of Kansas and coming back. What are the changes that you've seen here in Kansas over time, and are there things that Kansas should learn from other places that you would recommend?
Well, there a lot of that.
Well, you know, Cliff's Notes or something.
And there are 2 answers to that. One is that nothing has changed. Especially out on the ranch, you have grass, and when the rain falls, why, the grass grows, and it's a great kind of leveling effect. Everybody is subject to the same thing that means success or failure, and that's the climate. So I was able to walk through life without a prejudice. As a kid with curiosity, wonder, very interested in life, big cities and their problems. What could we learn? I predict that within a year, 2025, the largest capital investment in Kansas history is going to come our way. $13 billion coming in to build an energy system combining solar and wind in southwest Kansas, then on transmission lines that are already being built, almost being built, following I-70 into Missouri, into Illinois, into Indiana. $2 billion is in the direct contract to laborers, people who are going to build the things. $8 billion going to be joined to the total gross product in Kansas for local suppliers, workers, wages. $37 million for workers. Anyway, I'll go on. Now, Jerry Moran and Mr. Marshall have said, and I think the letter went out yesterday, you could ask him when Sanders comes. They're complaining that Kansas is being charged too much for its energy that goes out of state. Well, this is going to be privately funded, not by taxes. So the Kansas taxpayer is not going to pay for it. Sounds like I'm pitching this. I don't work for anybody. But I made it a point to call the CEO before I came here, because I wanted to tell you what's going to happen. He said you can call him. And I will leave some contact. And he points, but he said, but he has a question. Why isn't Kansas more excited about this? This is going to mean you'll be the energy capital of the country, you know, starting the grid, which ultimately has to be built to provide alternative energy to fossil fuels. And I said, you know, I think people in Kansas are like what they like their lives, and they don't probably understand the total scope of this. So I'm going to leave this information if you want to get a hold of their public affairs or ultimately the CEO, who will talk to you. Michael Polsky is his name. And if I'm wrong, prove it wrong. Call him a liar. That's my reporting for tonight.
Thank you, Bill.
I'll leave it for you.
Thank you so much for being with us this evening. All right, now I got to do my commercial. I got to do my
Oh,
sponsor
good.
message.
Okay.
Okay, before you get up, on this Saturday, we're going to be opening a new exhibit at the Dole Institute on the ERA, ratification and rescission movements in the early 70s. So it's going to open on Saturday and be open for the next few months. So I want you to come back and visit the Dole Institute. It's going to be in the Elizabeth Dole Gallery and Reading Room. And then next Tuesday at 6:30, we're going to have an awesome program called The Counselors. It's a format that's a mock trial and a debate, a cross between those things. And KU students are going to be examining experts. They're going to be discussing term limits for the Supreme Court. It's going to be fascinating. It's always fun. And I hope you'll be back next week. Bill Kurtis,
Can I
it's
do
been
one
an
more?
honor.
Can
You
I
do
do
it.
one more? I almost
Bill's
for-
going to do his closing message.
Yeah, the University of Kansas Press is going to publish my memoir. It'll be in 2025, not that far off. We have to argue about what's going to be cut. I only wrote 800 pages.
I read most of it.
Oh, God. God, you poor thing. So I only covered about a third of my career. I'll come back.
There you go. Let's take him up on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening. Thanks for being with us.
Well, I hope I didn't go too long. Oh, sure.
I'm Tom Averill.
Tom, yeah.
I do your tornado piece in the
Oh, great.
in that book.
Oh, yeah, that's
So
right.
thanks a lot for it. It'll be out
Good.
around the same time as your memoir.
Oh,
So,
terrific.
Yeah, it'll be
Well,
wonderful.
geez, I'll cover the
Thanks
bases.
for everything. No.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming up.
Think your great-grandfather was Bert Horton.
Yes. Oh, my grandfather, not great.
Okay.
Yeah.
My great-grandfather was Frederick